Felled by a bloody parasol and tripping over his own feet, Lackner should have been victorious. Strangle her till she was unconscious and interrogate and torture her if needed to get the information he wanted. Then the bitch started kicking him repeatedly in the balls, and his vision turned red. All he felt was rage, and then pleasure. Lackner had never felt such pleasure as when he was squeezing her throat tighter and tighter. Her death would have been amazing for him. Unfortunately, he had made the mistake of underestimating the walking disaster of a woman with her ridiculous flowered parasol, and then the even bigger mistake of letting go of his prey. Her knife was painful, but he was still capable of catching her, and then Lackner had inexplicably tripped. He had never tripped before in his life, and now they were gone, and he was losing blood in a way that he never had before. Lackner couldn't understand it. He couldn't staunch the blood. Lackner had received his fair share of wounds during his training. It should have been easy to treat his wound quickly and then get the hell out of there, but he couldn't walk because of the pain and the ever-flowing blood. Her blade was poisoned, Lackner. Lackner glared in the direction of his chieftain. Miss Evans is a smart woman and far too kind. When I found out what you had done to her, Adam stepped forward with Nasir at his side. I was planning on having you executed. There is no room for someone so honorless in our tribe, but Adam held up a tiny bottle. Miss Evans gave me this. To save your honorless hide. Then she is a fool, Lackner sneered. That fool, Adam said calmly, you owe your life to, and you will have to live your life owing it to a fool and an invader. Lackner glared even harder, and you will have to do it on your own. You are banished from the Medjai, Lackner. There is no place in our tribes for an excuse of a man who harms women for no reason. You were ordered to follow her and listen. You have brought dishonor on us. Now, let us assist you to get medical treatment. I wouldn't want you to bleed out and not live through the torment of being bested by not one, but two white women you look down on. Lackner spat at Adam's feet and was immediately kicked in the face by Nasir. He is already bleeding out, Nasir, Adam said calmly before grabbing one of Lackner's arms. And yet, he is still a disrespectful and ungrateful piece of garbage, Nasir said moodily before grabbing his other arm. Lackner began cursing at the two of them profusely. Maybe we should get MS. Carnahan back over here with her parasol. She could whack him unconscious, and we wouldn't have to deal with his foul mouth. I am sure she would happily oblige, Adam grunted as they heaved the heavy and still spitting mad Lackner to a nearby cheap lodging to treat his wounds. Terence couldn't stop himself from snorting in amusement when he unlocked his office to find his nephew blushing at being caught with Miss Evans nestled in his lap. Should I leave the two of you alone? Terence grinned. Ardith blushed brightly and glared at his uncle. She was indisposed and insisted I be her pillow, Ardith defended. So you just let her. And besides, you could have moved after she fell asleep. Terence said with amusement before taking a seat at his desk and beginning to sort through some documents for the next day. Ardith looked at Miss Evans hesitatingly. He could move her, but it would be like moving a cat, a crime, and he just did not want to. I don't want her to wake up, Ardith argued weakly. Terence raised his eyebrows at his nephew before determining to ignore him. Adam had a similar reaction, coupled with shock. He was relieved to finally leave behind the snarling Lackner to walk in on a woman cuddling with his son. Did something meaningful occur in my absence? Adam said teasingly. Miss Evans took some medicine which had the unfortunate side effect of making her drunk. She is fine, though, and insisted on using your son as a pillow, Terence said matter-of-factly. Ardith looked up at the ceiling beseechingly. Was there any way to escape this embarrassment? He could clearly see that his father was never going to let this go, and was about to extract himself simply so he could make his escape, when Hermione began thrashing and crying. I didn't take it. Her scream was loud and heart-wrenching and caused Adam and Terence to immediately start running over. Tears were flowing down her cheeks. I didn't take it. Please get off of me. Ardith struggled to try to calm her as she actively tried to escape. Her begging was gut-wrenching. Adam felt his heart drop in his stomach as she continued to beg and plead for her life and grab at her arm painfully. Ardith tried to stroke her hair, but it just caused more panicked attempts to escape. "Miss Evans, you're asleep, Miss Evans." "Hermione!" Her eyes finally snapped open, and she startled away from Ardith to crouch in the corner tearfully. Miss Evans started patting her person frantically before her right hand found what it was looking for and settled in her pocket. They all stood in anticipation while Miss Evans breathed in and out desperately. "Miss Evans," Terence ventured. She didn't even look at him. "Miss Evans," still no response. "Hermione," he finally tried and was rewarded when she looked at him. "Would you like to sit down?" Hermione inched in front of the furthest part of the couch and sat down cautiously. "I'm going to make you some tea." Hermione nodded distractedly, and Terence breathed a sigh of relief and walked out the door as fast as possible. Adam sat down slowly in a seat facing Miss Evans and Ardith. "Are you all right?" Adam asked gently. "That's a stupid question," Hermione whipped out without even considering. Adam chuckled despite the impudence of the response, and Ardith smiled as she immediately blushed. "Sorry," Adam bowed his head at the apology. "Why am I leaping of all things in Mr. Bay's office?" Adam smirked at her use of Mr. "One of my men tried to strangle you." "No, I remember that part." Hermione gave a strangled laugh. "After that is the fuzzy part." "Well, I'd love to hear that part as well," Adam said with a sneaky grin. "Ardith, how about you tell us?" Ardith glared at his father. He couldn't control his blushing and stammering throughout the entire story. His only consolation was that Hermione was, if at all possible, even more embarrassed than he was. Her face was in her hands by the end, but Ardith could see her bright red neck and ears. "I asked to use you as a pillow," her strangled voice came out. When he didn't respond, Hermione immediately groaned. "Excuse me, I need to go dig myself a hole and bury myself in it." Hermione carefully stood up, but immediately had to sit down again as Dr. Bay walked in with her cup of tea. Adam grinned and was about to ask Ardith to elaborate on some of the finer details he had clearly left out. However, Terence was very anxious to not discuss anything with the hysterical woman, and thankfully, Adam was not able to extend his son and her embarrassment. "So, brother, what is to become of Lackner?" The mood immediately sobered. "Banishment." Adam held out the balm to Hermione, but she waved him off. "Keep it. It will heal most injuries. For a rainy day, not that it really rains in Egypt." Adam nodded his thanks. "My men will still be following you, Miss Evans," Adam said bluntly. Hermione took a sip of her tea unconcernedly. "That's all right. I enjoy their company for the most part," Hermione smirked. "Not that the enjoyment is shared." Hermione looked over at Ardith. Something was niggling in her mind. "You look familiar. Have you followed me before?" Adam and Terence began sniggering, and Ardith looked to the ceiling in frustration. Was one time not enough? Did Allah really take so much enjoyment from watching him humiliate himself in the same way over and over again? "Hermione," Evelyn was hugging the life out of her and checking she was okay. Once that was ascertained, she smacked Hermione hard on the arm. "Ow, what was that for?" "A week. You disappear for a week with only a written note delivered by Dr. Bay. I don't see you. I don't hear from you." I was spending time with Harry and making sure that Mr. Hansey had time to leave Cairo before he got any more ideas. I didn't leave my house once in that entire time. Hermione rubbed at her arm. Evelyn pulled Hermione into another crushing hug. "Never die in front of me," Evelyn said tearfully. "I'll do my best," Hermione said. Evelyn pulled back and stared at her emotionally. "Not to interrupt our moment, but I need coffee. Desperately. I ran out." Hermione saw the flash of black in the corner of her eye still being followed. Ardith had been antsy. He had been following Miss Carnahan completely out of sight for a week, and there was still no Miss Evans. Where was she? He was starting to become concerned. Had Lackner come back to finish the job? Was she lying dead in an alley with a crushed neck? He had rarely known the relief he felt when he saw her waiting for Miss Carnahan at the front entrance to the museum. Ardith was confident that at the very least, Miss Carnahan had no idea he was following her. He had been obsessively working on becoming invisible for the last 2 years. Miss Evans probably at least saw him partially still, but Ardith would be good enough to follow her unnoticed. Someday. His father had left for the village after a few days of Miss Evans being gone. Let your uncle know when she comes back, and until she pulls her usual stunts, keep following and listening. In light of the nightmare both his uncle and father witnessed, Ardith had shared what Miss Evans had shared when she was under the effects of the medicine. Even Uncle Terence had been absolutely horrified, and despite still not knowing what exactly Miss Evans was, his father had decided that Miss Evans was most definitely not a threat, at least not for now. It was just as much the information that Ardith had gathered as the fact that Miss Evans had willingly saved the man that had tried to murder her. And from Ardith's point of view, he was following her to make sure that Lackner didn't come back. It was shocking that Lackner was no longer there. Ardith had grown up with Lackner. He couldn't believe that he was no longer going to join the guard with him. No more sparring. No more crude jokes, not that he would miss those. But Ardith couldn't understand what exactly had happened. Ardith was camped out on top of a nearby building, overseeing the cafe that the two women always went to. The nice thing about Miss Evans being gone, Ardith actually had a chance to learn the lay of the land and put research into how to follow her from this point and Miss Carnahan's apartment from a distance. Ardith could see Miss Evans trying to pinpoint exactly where he was. He thought he did a good job of staying out of sight, but many of the other Medjai had thought similarly just before she did something absolutely insane and humiliating for them. It's nice that the men in black are no longer following us around, Evelyn sighed peacefully. Yeah, sure, Hermione snorted. What are you talking about? Don't you like them being gone? Evelyn asked, confused. I will answer when they are actually gone. We've been followed this entire time. That is not possible, Evelyn said with disbelief. I haven't seen a single one of them. He's been following at a distance, Hermione said simply. I don't know exactly where he is at this moment, but I've caught glimpses of him several times. He has definitely been practicing on you while I was gone, probably learning your patterns. Getting used to hiding more effectively where you generally go. Evelyn's mouth dropped in disbelief. Are you telling me I was being followed this entire time, and I didn't even notice? Evelyn Yell whispered, and was clearly scandalized. She began looking frantically around in paranoia. Ardith watched in amusement as Miss Evans clearly clued Miss Carnahan into his presence. He smirked when she completely glossed over his hiding place. What about the man who strangled you? Why aren't you more worried? They dealt with him, Hermione shrugged. Plus, my life would be very boring without them, don't you think? Evelyn scoffed in disbelief. I can't believe you, Evelyn said derisively. I like my habits even when they are absolutely insane. That's a good word for it, Evelyn muttered. So, what have you been reading in my absence? Evelyn was clearly unimpressed with the change of topic, but began going over the manuscript she was working through on Socrates anyhow. Ardith immediately perked up and grinned when he saw the women preparing to part. Now was going to be the real test. He couldn't wait. Chapter 10. Miss Evans ran agilely through the marketplace and would often segue into alleyways. It was difficult to dart out of sight when she would suddenly turn around to observe the rooftops to catch him running after her. It was far more difficult than Ardith had considered. He had known it would be near impossible. The other Medjai had been chasing after Miss Evans for years. Ardith had heard that she would try different methods of losing the other men, but it was really nothing compared to experiencing it for himself. Ardith could understand the cockiness from the other soldiers, completely crashing into dust the minute that they actually were required to keep track of her. But he also couldn't deny how exhilarating it was. Ardith finally made a mistake after a few minutes of this game. Ardith had been jumping between buildings when Hermione suddenly turned and spotted him mid-jump. She immediately grinned and darted into a dark alleyway just out of sight. Ardith frantically searched for the now missing Miss Evans. He continued in the direction he had been going until he could see the entirety of the path he had last seen her. There was no sight of her. It was far too late to save himself when Ardith finally caught the telltale whiff of honey. There was no way to shield himself from the wave of red paint that coated his face and the front of his robes. Ardith cupped his fingers and scooped the paint off his eyelids. "You know, it doesn't have quite the look I was going for," Hermione said with clear amusement. Ardith located a dry section of robe and wiped enough excess paint off his face to finally open his eyes. He had to wonder where Miss Evans had been hiding the paint. It was not a small container. Ardith supposed it was possible for her to have come up behind him to climb the building he was currently on while he had been looking for her. "And what look were you going for, Miss Evans?" Hermione smiled widely at the question. "You know, just trying to make you not immediately identifiable from your cohorts." Ardith stared at her blankly before it finally hit him. "Our robes," Ardith groaned. "Our black robes have been how you've been recognizing us." "Well," Hermione grinned, "it is why we have dubbed you the Men in Black, and I deeply thank you." "For the day Lackner tried to kill you?" Ardith asked with confusion. "No, but you were very nice to sleep on." Hermione only blushed slightly. Thankfully, she had had an entire week to get over the embarrassment of what had happened. "No, thank you for realizing the mistake you all have been making. Now, I win the bet with Jonathan." "Did you really?" Ardith said critically. "You had to throw red paint on me so I'd realize." "That is a pretty big hint, and incredibly humiliating from the standpoint of my tribe, who has had countless men following you for the last 2 years, and not one of us has realized it in all that time." "I already gave you a subtle hint," Hermione exclaimed in frustration. "And you still showed up in black. I said change out of your mistake. It was almost too blatant." Hermione thrust the empty can in his hands. She immediately started to walk away, but Ardith followed right behind her. "What are you doing?" "Following you," Ardith said simply. "You lose," Hermione insisted. "I lose when I can't find you." Ardith grinned before throwing off the top layers of his robes, leaving him in a shirt, pants, and weapons belt. Hermione's brain stopped walking for a second when she realized just how attractive he was under all the layers of fabric. Dr. Bay's nephew was clearly young. He had a beard that was only barely growing in, and the lean physique of a man not quite grown into his own body. But it was clear that he was going to be dangerously attractive the older he got. Ardith grew more puzzled the more quiet she was. "Are you all right, Miss Evans?" Hermione shook her head violently. "Fine. I need more coffee," Hermione grumbled. Ardith followed as she easily climbed down the side of the building and walked back to the cafe she had just been at with Miss Carnahan. The owner of the cafe looked at her and Ardith askance. "Hal Saturmi Olmashrubati. Are you going to be throwing drinks?" Hermione laughed. "La. No, Hermione had a good relationship with the man that owned her favorite cafe. Mostly because she always paid him generously for tolerating her crazy behavior, and Hermione showered him with praise in his native tongue for the amazing coffee that he made. "Jid." "Good," he nodded with relief. Ardith was also feeling relief. Paint and hot coffee all over him on the same day sounded a bit much. Miss Evans didn't complain when he sat at the same table as her. Ardith accepted the cup of coffee offered to him and listened to Miss Evans' banter with the man who served their coffee. It was unusual for locals to be so naturally friendly with a foreigner. However, Ardith supposed it was equally as unusual for a foreigner to go to the trouble of learning to speak Arabic and speaking it almost fluently after only 2 years. When the owner finally went off to serve another customer, Hermione turned to see Dr. Bay's nephew watching her intensely. She cleared her throat. "What is your name?" Ardith's eyebrows with confusion. "Ardith Bay," he responded with uncertainty. "Why do you want to know, Miss Evans?" Hermione grinned. He still had red paint embedded in his eyebrows. "I keep calling you Dr. Bay's nephew in my head," Hermione shrugged. "It becomes long-winded, even in my mind. And for the record, you can call me Hermione. Your uncle always calls me Miss Evans, and it's annoying. It's the reason why I call him Mr. Bay instead of Doctor." Ardith smirked. It is more proper to refer to a woman who is not family as Miss. It is also more proper to not follow women in general around and sneak into their friends' houses to spy on them. Only one of our men tried that, Ardith argued. Only because my cat scratched the shit out of him for it, and we continue to put oil on the window seals. Ardith blushed at her language. I thought women were supposed to be refined, he critiqued. Hermione raised an eyebrow haughtily. Doesn't your fiancé object? Ardith startled back at her abrupt and hysterical laughter. My Hermione's hysterical giggling continued. My fiancé, she was finally able to force out. My apologies, Ardith said with concern. Did you break it off with Jonathan Carnahan after all? Hermione grinned even wider. Oh, I assure you, I am as engaged now as I've ever been. Hermione patted his shoulder. Don't you worry. Ardith felt his heart sink a little. Then what was so funny? Ardith tried to control the dark feeling growing in his chest. Hermione didn't notice the downturn in his mood. After all, Ardith had worked very hard to not convey the majority of his emotions since their first encounter. Oh, I was just surprised that your window seal soldier heard so much with my cat to contend with. Hermione's eyes twinkled, especially after falling flat on his back twice. Jonathan was going to think this was hilarious. Maybe they could extend the misunderstanding to have some fun. Ardith didn't know what to do with his feelings. There should be no reason why he should be upset that Miss Evans was to be married. The only thing he could think of was that he liked her as a man like a woman, and that was, after all, ridiculous. Miss Evans was much older than him, and foreigners rarely mixed with his people if ever. It would be absolutely ridiculous. Maybe it was simply that Miss Evans was the first attractive woman he had ever really conversed with or seen. The women in his village tended to shroud their faces, and it would be absolutely shallow of him if that was the only reason. Ardith would let it go. He had to. Hermione noticed her companion's distraction. She subtly paid the bill and snuck off. She was halfway down the road before Ardith noticed. He cursed his idiocy and immediately started running after her. It was no use, though. Miss Evans turned a corner and was gone like a puff of smoke. I suppose that's something, Uncle Terence sighed. You actually did quite well. Ardith could see that his uncle was begrudgingly impressed. Sure, Ardith had been tricked in the end, but he had figured out how Miss Evans was spotting them so easily, and that was good information. I'd best take you back to the Medjai village so that your father can make the verdict of whether you are ready to join the guard. Ardith smiled sadly. Without Lackner, it wasn't quite so exciting anymore, but he was still proud that he would be able to fulfill his calling. The road back was familiar and took at least a day. Ardith was anxious to be going back, but when they got there was nothing. All of the tents were gone. There was not a single trace of anyone. Ardith looked around in confusion and alarm, and Terence was equally concerned. What is going on, Uncle? Ardith's voice came out small, frightened. Something must have happened. Let's go, Terence finally said confidently. Ardith followed without complaint. It was lucky for Terence that there was a plan already set in place should anything go wrong. Only fully fledged Medjai were aware of the location they would relocate to in the case that enemies found their camp and attacked, which is clearly what must have happened. There was no other reason why they would leave immediately without bothering to send word to Cairo. Ardith was on edge for the rest of the trip. This had never happened before in his lifetime. They had always been camped here as long as he could remember. It had been nearly 30 years since enemies had found their camp. Warring tribes was not uncommon, but the Medjai had a fierce reputation which was respected. When they finally reached the new campsite, they were held at gunpoint. You're safe. Hazib walked forward and clapped them each on the backs with relief. What is going on? Terence said with worry. An extreme group of fanatics attacked our camp 2 nights after the chief returned, Hazib said gravely. Where is Adam? Terence knew that Adam would not allow anyone to lead the guard for at least a month after an attack of this magnitude. He was injured, Hazib said carefully. Is he all right? Ardith rushed forward in a panic. He is alive, Hazib assured him. But he almost didn't make it. He had a salve on him that saved his life. He was bleeding out and told us to use it before he passed out. I don't know where he got it, but it is the only reason he is alive right now. He has extensive injuries. Adam may not be able to fight the way he used to, but he is alive and will continue to live. Why don't you go see him, Ardith, while I talk to Terence? Ardith hesitated, but followed a member of the guard to his family tent anyhow. How did they know the location of our camp? Terence whispered harshly. Lackner, Hazib said darkly. Ardith was on the verge of tears. His father looked unbearably small. Adam Bey should be towering formidably, not laying under a blanket and injured. His mother had clearly been crying and rushed forward the minute he entered to hug him desperately. Thank Allah you are all right. Ardith was tall enough now to envelope her shorter form. He hugged her tightly, but his eyes were fixed on his father. Bandages enveloped his neck and chest. His chest rose and fell shakily. He almost didn't make it, Basma said shakily. The medicine he received from Miss Evans saved his life. What happened, Alumu? The audacity of those morons banishing him. Lackner had switched allegiances long ago, but he had held out to know where Hamunaptra was. And if he could get Ardith Bey to switch allegiances also, all the better. But Ardith was a good little soldier. It became very clear to Lackner that he was not going to seduce the next generation to his cause. So he would need to take over the Medjai by force. Lackner had joined the fanatics the Medjai hated so much. They had vision. They didn't want the British in Egypt, and more importantly, they were willing to do something about it. He would drive them out and kill them if necessary. And the creature could take back Egypt for them. Lackner had to know where he was buried. It was unfortunate that their precious chieftain would put a British bitch before him. He would be the first to go. They raided their camp. There was screaming and glorious fighting. Lackner felt a jolt of pleasure with every kill, but nothing compared to when he stabbed their precious chieftain and slit his throat. It was beautiful. Unfortunately, their own soldiers were not as high caliber as the Medjai soldier, but at least Lackner was able to destroy that high and mighty bastard. They would destroy the Medjai. Today or tomorrow, it did not matter when. It was simply a pity that Ardith wasn't there to see his father cut down like the scum he was. You saved my brother. It was Hermione's turn to be surprised by Dr. Terence Bey. He was sitting on a bench near the entrance, and she hadn't even seen him. Hermione stopped to stare at him. How so? Hermione was confused. That medicine you gave him, it saved his life. Lackner tried to kill him. Dr. Bey looked tired. Is he doing okay? He is okay. Hermione let out the breath she was holding. He won't be as he was before, but he's alive. Hermione digested the information before immediately digging around in her purse again. She pulled out the same bottle she had drunk from only 2 weeks ago and held it out to him. Terence didn't move. Take it. Obviously, he shouldn't drink it. Hermione gave him a wry smile. Pour it over his wounds. It will help his healing, maybe more so than the salve. The salve is mainly to stop bleeding. Dr. Bey hesitated, but took it. His throat was cut. Stopping his bleeding was the main concern. Hermione gulped and nodded. I hope he gets better, Mr. Bey. Terence smiled to himself. I hope so too, Miss Evans. Hermione narrowed her eyes at him. Ardith Bey has a big mouth, Hermione muttered. That was the point of him following you, Terence laughed. Hermione rolled her eyes and began making her way to the library. Remember, pour it over the wounds. Try to not use the whole bottle at once. A little goes a long way, she called behind her. Terence looked down at it. It was greenish. Clearly an herb of some kind. Oh, Terence looked up, and if there's a puff of green smoke, it's normal. Terence opened his mouth to respond, but she was already gone. He held it up to the light again. A puff of green smoke, Terence said in disbelief. You're quiet, Hermione. Evelyn was trying to teach Hermione ancient Egyptian, but she was unusually distracted. And yet again, Hermione was immediately brightening in that infuriating way. It's nothing. Of course it's nothing, Evelyn sighed. Hermione was so much like Jonathan. More responsible, but exactly like him in every other way. They both simply wouldn't talk about their real problems. They were a bookshelf with only a few books available to be read, and the rest of the books were off limits. You felt like you were being let in because they would hand you a book off the shelf, but as time passed, you realized that there was a high shelf that you weren't allowed to touch. And boy, did you want to read the books on the top shelf, but they would never be available. Evelyn was startled out of her rumination by an unexpected flick to the forehead. Hermione was grinning at her mischievously. "So I won that bet with Jonathan. You gave them another hint, didn't you?" Evelyn chuckled. "A bucket of red paint," Hermione grinned. "And now I can tell you apart from the others." "That's cheating," Evelyn said with a blank expression. "But," Hermione interjected, "were any actual rules set in place? It's really Jonathan's fault if he loses at a game where no rules existed to begin with." Evelyn rolled her eyes. "Fine. I won't tell Jonathan. He has been selling you those ridiculous pieces of art. It's about time he paid you back for the exorbitant prices he's been charging you." "You realize," Hermione argued, "I don't care about the money. I just like winning. Still, he's taking advantage of you." And it did not make Evelyn pleased with Jonathan in the least. If alcohol was Jonathan's only way of coping, he needed to fund it himself. But Hermione just shrugged. "Most people will take advantage of you. The sooner you accept it, the less your heart will be broken in the end." Hermione's eyes, they were so sad. "Trust me." Evelyn stopped breathing. "Hermione." Evelyn took Hermione's hand. "I can't imagine what happened. But I will never take advantage of you." Hermione looked at her before squeezing her hand. "Never say never, Evelyn, but I hope so." Hermione let out a gusty breath. "I'm tired. I should go home, try to sleep for once." Today was a dreamless sleep potion day, that was for sure. Evelyn looked hurt. Hermione gave her a hug. "We all do things we regret when bad things happen. Just take it as me saying, no matter what you do at your lowest moment, I won't abandon you, no matter what horrible things you may someday do." Evelyn chewed her lip. That is a really sad way of thinking about life. Whatever gets us through. Chapter 11. "I don't believe you. Admit defeat, Jonathan Carnahan." "Nay, I say." "Well, there is only one way to settle this then." Nasir grumbled with frustration as the Europeans walked right up to him. He had changed just as Ardith suggested. Nasir felt completely out of place in the dust-colored robes. He gripped his newspaper tightly so the blasted woman didn't snatch it again. "Are you one of the formerly black-robed gentlemen?" Miss Evans said as she sat across from him. "Yes," Nasir sighed with a wince. "The ones that have been following Miss Evans?" Jonathan asked a little desperately. "Yes." Nasir was as embarrassed as Terence had been to find out their mistake. It was absolutely humiliating. "No," Jonathan said with frustration. "Pay up," Hermione said with her hand held out. Jonathan grumbled profusely as he pulled out his wallet. Nasir's eyebrows raised. "You couldn't have held out another month, dear fellow. Black was such a good color on you." Hermione snatched the cash from Jonathan's hand primly. "Thank you. Have a nice day." The two of them walked off, and Nasir opened his newspaper again with a shake of his head. He really hoped that his duty would be relieved soon. These Europeans were absolutely insane. Basma, Terence, and Ardith watched with amazement as the green smoke cleared and Adam's wounds were mostly healed. Basma touched it carefully, and Adam grinned. "The pain is almost gone," Adam croaked. "Allah's shit," Terence yelled. "Terence, watch your filthy mouth," Basma yelled. "I think, Alumu, this is one of the few times cursing makes absolute sense," Ardith said with amazement. Adam sat up carefully. "I still feel," Adam granted as he held onto his chest. "Pain within my chest, but I feel leagues better." Basma wiped away happy tears from her eyes. "I am making that wonderful girl a blanket," Basma exclaimed suddenly, and immediately went off to get her supplies. She stopped suddenly. "What colors does she like, Terence?" "How the bloody hell should I know?" Terence burst out. "You see her every day. What colors does she wear?" Basma hedged. "Just colors, I don't know. You have eyes, yes." "Yes." But so your eyes haven't deduced the colors she has worn, even though the woman is literally in front of you nearly every day. Their arguing went back and forth for several minutes, and grew more and more heated by the minute. Black and red, Ardith supplied when it looked like Terence was going to blow a vein in his forehead. Thank you, Ardith. At least someone pays attention, Basma huffed. She gave Adam a kiss and walked off. Terence threw his hands up. Why do men get married? Adam improved vastly over the next couple of weeks, but it was clear to him that he was altered. He became breathless easily, and his chest began to hurt if he overexerted himself. Adam was still healthy, but it was clear that he would not be able to attend to the guard in the way that a chief needed to. He called Ardith to his tent, along with Hazib. There was really no point in tiptoeing around the issue. Ardith, you need to take over for me. Ardith stopped breathing. What? But I haven't even patrolled Hamunaptra, and you are still healthy, father. Adam smiled. I'm alive, Ardith, but I am changed and aging, and I can't go on forever. I am glad that I will be here to help you take over smoothly. And as for patrolling Hamunaptra, you will begin learning the ropes from Hazib, while I help the tribe from the camp. You are a humble and loyal man, Ardith. You will earn the respect of the soldiers through your growing experience. It is time, and I am sure that you will learn quickly. I agree, Hazib clapped Ardith on the back. Your hesitation tells me that you are taking the responsibility seriously. You are more than ready. Within days, Ardith had been granted the tattoos of a protector of the tribe. Ardith struggled and quickly began to understand what Miss Evans had been talking about. Death could never be conveyed between people to be understood. It was a purely first-hand experience that horrified and scarred your mind. The Medjai lost warriors too often. Thankfully, there were not too many who found Hamunaptra, but the ones who did fought tooth and nail to maintain their foothold within the city. None succeeded, and while Ardith understood, he resented the arrogance and greed. It was blood ill spent. I have finished, Ardith. Adam and Ardith turned to see Basma with a giant blanket in her grasp. Ardith took the soft blanket from her. It would suit Miss Evans. I need you to deliver it to her. Ardith didn't want to do that. Wouldn't it be better to send it back with Uncle when he comes to visit? Adam watched his son with narrowed eyes. Absolutely not, Basma scoffed. I would never know if it got there, and Terence would just throw it at her with a here if he did with no explanation. I want someone to convey my gratitude to her. Of course, Alumu, I will be honored to, Ardith relented. Basma nodded with satisfaction and went back to making dinner. Ardith sighed. It will be good to have a break. You have been working hard, Adam said, as he continued to work on the figurine he was carving. Ardith wasn't so opposed to taking a break. He was opposed to seeing Miss Evans again. It was tempting fate to be in close proximity with an engaged woman he found far too attractive. Ardith thought with time he would forget her somewhat, but Miss Evans just grew in his mind in the middle of the night when he had nothing else to occupy him. Uncle Terence would say he was utterly ridiculous if he knew, and Uncle Terence would be right. What did Ardith even know about her? He had followed her for a total of 3 days and had been humiliated at least 5 times in that small period of time. It was ridiculous. But Alumu wanted him to deliver the blanket, and deliver the blanket he must. Yes, unless, of course, Adam ventured. There is some reason that Miss Evans makes you uncomfortable. Ardith looked sharply at his father. Adam was smiling mischievously. No, why would she make me uncomfortable? Adam watched Ardith's attempts to hide his feelings with a widening grin. Ardith had never shown any nervousness around any woman except Miss Evans. Of course, Ardith hadn't had any contact with any other woman, but that was besides the point. Ardith noticed her. Maybe, Adam hedged. She is attractive. And engaged, Ardith said with a raised eyebrow. Engagements are broken every day, his father waved off nonchalantly. Are you encouraging me to pursue an outsider? Ardith said with disbelief. Adam shrugged. Just letting you know it has happened before. If you are interested, there is nothing wrong with trying. Your mother is already clearly in love with her and they haven't even met. and I assure you, when it comes to courting whoever you marry, your Alumu is going to be half the battle. Still, Ardith pressed, Miss Evans is engaged and dangerous. I get it, Adam winked. That's half her charm. Ardith shook his head in disbelief and walked out the tent to his father's rumbling laughter. Ardith set out the next day. He had firmly determined that he would deliver it, and within 5 sentences be done, and on his way back to the village. But Allah was firmly against him in the matter. Oh, good. You are here to cover the Miss Evans shift, Terence said with relief. The current sentry twisted his ankle, falling into the Nile. Don't ask me how she did it. We are all endlessly amazed at the skills of Hermione Evans. Uncle Terence was clearly in a foul temper. It had been a year since Ardith was last in Cairo, and it seemed that Miss Evans was more determined than ever to drive Uncle up a wall. I was only here to deliver a package for Alumu, but I can cover until the new shift comes. Of course, our chieftain. That does take some getting used to, Uncle muttered before leading the way into his study. A young man named Ali bowed his head to Ardith respectfully from his seat. Ardith smiled kindly at him. Outsmarted by Miss Evans, the young man blushed. Yes, Ali said, with no little amount of embarrassment. One minute I was following her down by the Nile, and the next I had been pushed right into the river and had twisted my ankle on the way out. Don't worry, Ardith chuckled. We all have our own stories about what she has done to us. She tricked me into a brothel and doused me in red paint on 2 separate occasions. Ali laughed nervously. Well, Chief, I had better head back to camp to get my replacement. I'm sorry I didn't make it longer, Ali said with shame. Please. Don't worry about it, Ardith said kindly and picked up the bundled blanket. I'll deliver my package now. Don't you want to wait until you lose Miss Evans? Uncle Terence said with resignation. It was sadly no longer a question of if but when. Funny enough, the package is for Miss Evans, Ardith said with a small smirk. Terence's mouth dropped. Why? Terence said, completely flummoxed. Alumu wishes to express her gratitude. She was under the impression you would just throw the blanket at her with no ceremony if she asked you to deliver it, Ardith said with amusement. Bloody women, Terence growled. Ardith bowed respectfully and then sat down in the entrance to the museum. Several uptight visitors walked in and looked at him askance before going on their merry way. A particularly rude couple walked in and began commenting very loudly, probably believing that Ardith did not speak English. I thought you told me this was a museum of high repute, Henry. It seems that any riffraff can come in. I understand, Gwyneth. The man was incredibly overweight and had a comically huge mustache, and the woman she was stitched and pulled into her dress so tightly in such weird places, Ardith was amazed her spine was still intact. But it is for the public. We will just have to condescend and tolerate the common man. The man said, common, like a particularly special brand insult, and spit it out like a bad-tasting fruit. Well, they let you in so it goes without saying riff-raff are allowed. Ardith had been so focused on the incredibly rude couple that he hadn't even noticed Miss Evans walk in just behind them. Ardith lost his breath for a minute. She had the same cloak and robe draped over one arm, and her voluptuous figure was on full display with her tight pants and heeled boots. The man spluttered indignantly until he saw the beautiful woman standing before him and eyed her assets for a moment. His wife immediately saw his observations and turned an ugly blotched purple and whacked him with her parasol. You will stop eyeing that hussy this minute, and you, the woman snarled at Miss Evans nastily, put some proper clothes on. I will not have some prostitute, Gwyneth said uglily. Steal my husband because of her lack of genteel clothing. Hermione burst into laughter. Oh, sweetie, there will never be enough money in the world for that to happen. Well, I say, Henry spluttered angrily. They both stomped away as primly as possible, and Hermione rolled her eyes before settling her gaze on him. Ardith Bay? Hermione asked slowly. Yes, he chuckled. Hermione's throat grew thicker as she heard how much deeper his voice was. Damn, what other changes had he undergone? Hermione shook herself out of that particularly inappropriate and frankly dangerous train of thought. "How is your uncle today? Still have a stick up his ass?" Ardith grinned. "He is angry that you apparently caused Ali to fall and sprain his ankle falling into the Nile." "He's hurt," Hermione said with surprise. "I didn't mean to do that. Just distract him long enough to escape his attempts at stalking me." "Still, you did cause him to fall in the Nile," Ardith said with a grin. "He is lucky a Nile crocodile did have him for lunch. It is not as if I pushed him into Lake Nessa," Hermione reasoned. "You and I both know the crocodiles avoid the river near Cairo, seeing as how they are smart enough to avoid poachers and escape becoming a snazzy pair of boots for an obnoxious tourist. And yet, there is still a chance. I guess the stick up the ass runs in the family," Hermione snogged. Ardith just shook his head at her language. Maybe that couple was right about this museum letting in all the riff-raff. "They meant lower class," Hermione explained. "Ah," Ardith nodded with understanding. "Well," he pulled out the giant bundle. "This is for you." Hermione raised an eyebrow. "For me? Yes, my mother wished to show her appreciation for you saving my father's life, especially after the strange medicine you sent that almost completely healed him, the one with the green smoke." "That isn't necessary," Hermione said quickly. "It wouldn't have been necessary if I hadn't been willing to save Lackner in the first place." It had caused an increasing amount of guilt in Hermione. She should have just let it be. Hermione had saved an attempted murderer after he tried to snuff the life out of her, and he had immediately done what attempted murderers do, gone back to trying to kill people. "They would have attacked our camp either way," Ardith reasoned. "And without you, we wouldn't have found out what Lackner was like nearly as soon. Please, take it. You really did save my father's life and deserve it." Hermione hesitatingly took the gift and opened the saddlebag. What she found was the most beautiful blanket she had ever seen. All black, red, and gold flowers and patterns. It was absolutely amazing. It put Mrs. Weasley's sweaters to shame. "It's wonderful. Please tell your mother she did an amazing job." "I will do that," Ardith said. "I'll leave you alone for today before I start stalking you. Just consider it my thanks. Just don't tell my uncle. You lost me in your usual way, just so you know." Hermione laughed and nodded. "I won't think on you. Thanks." Hermione walked off, and when she looked back, he was already gone. Ardith Bay really was improving in being stealthy. She would have to make sure he wasn't trying to lull her into a false sense of security. Hermione admired the blanket as she walked until she reached an alcove just outside the library. She pulled a tote bag out of her tiny beaded bag and placed the blanket carefully inside along with her coat and robe. "Jonathan Carnahan, you will not sell another piece of meaningless junk to her. Beauty is a matter of the person actually doing the beholding and thus the buying. For all you know, it could be priceless in her eyes." Hermione rolled her eyes fondly and walked into the library without taking notice of Ardith lurking close by in the shadows. He couldn't help himself. The minute he heard Jonathan Carnahan in the library, Ardith had to see the truth for himself. But it turned out to be impossible to tell. "Jonathan, Jonathan, come to sell your wares," Hermione said teasingly. "Why don't you just open your own market stall instead of pursuing archaeology? I'm sure you would be perfectly suited to the task." "How dare you suggest such a thing, beautiful Hermione? I am an archaeologist of high repute." "High repute," Evelyn scoffed rudely. "When was the last time you were part of a dig?" Jonathan opened his mouth, but Evelyn immediately interrupted him. "A respectable dig," Jonathan pouted. "Evie's being mean to me, Hermione," Jonathan whined petulantly. Ardith watched from his hiding place in disbelief. This was the man that he was competing with. A whiny man like this hardly seemed like a man deserving of Miss Evans. However, Ardith immediately felt like slapping himself. Competing. He wasn't competing. She was older, and he was barely growing into his facial hair. It was utterly ridiculous to even think of it as competing, especially since Ardith had determined the very thought of her as a wife was ridiculous. "What did you want to show to me, Jonathan?" Hermione smiled indulgently. Jonathan Carnahan pulled out a fertility statue. a truly hideous fertility statue. The genitalia was giant and ridiculous, and Miss Evans immediately burst into laughter. What on earth possessed you to think I would want to own such a thing? Hermione took it from him and started laughing hysterically again as she saw a similar genitalia on the statue's backside. Well, I say, Jonathan said with great offense. I was under the impression that my lovely fiancé had good taste. Jonathan sniffed. I must have been wrong. I only will be your lovely fiancé if you can convince dear Papa, Hermione said teasingly. A task you have failed at time and time again, quite catastrophically, I might add. Ardith swallowed painfully. Jonathan Carnahan had met her father. They were going to be engaged, provided that Jonathan Carnahan could win over the Evans patriarch. But what chance did Ardith stand against an upstanding British gentleman if Jonathan Carnahan was so quickly rebuffed? He would never consent to a desert warrior taking her to the middle of nowhere. Ardith immediately turned away and left. Harry is impossible to please. He set his will against liking me from a first glance. How am I supposed to overcome that? Jonathan had still failed to get Hermione's cat to like him. It seemed to be Harry's main goal in life to give Jonathan as many scars as possible. Unlike Jonathan, Harry had warmed up considerably to Evelyn and tried to get as many pets out of her as possible. It's not my problem, Hermione said with a smirk and passed the awful statue back to Jonathan. And as much as I appreciate the comedic quality of this particular piece, I shall have to decline. You could try one of the brothels. They might actually have use for art of this nature. Jonathan sighed and then turned his best puppy eyes on Evelyn. Evie, dear Evie, will you show it to Doctor? Bay for me? Absolutely not. Ardith kept his word. He did not follow Miss Evans the entirety of the rest of the day, but he was unusually agitated. He sat moodily in the library after the Europeans left and attempted to read through some literature detailing the rise of Seti II. Ardith was restless. He eventually gave up on his scholarly pursuit and shoved the book back in its place. It was definitely for the best that he had promised not to follow her. Ardith didn't think that he could watch her with Mr. Carnahan if only a few minutes of observation had made him this agitated. It was an utterly ridiculous situation. Curse his father for being right. He wanted the woman, and having her was completely out of the question. Hermione knew that Ardith Bay was following her the next day, but damn, he was getting good. She finally decided, after only barely spotting him every couple streets, that she would need to go to Evelyn's and throw him off that way. Hermione would make it so that he wouldn't even know when she had left the apartment. There was really no place for an Arab man to hide inside. It was well lit, and so long as Hermione made sure not to get caught by one of the occupants, it would be more than adequate. So, Hermione, are we being followed today? Evelyn said with a sigh. She was going to have to accept that her life was doomed to be stalked by strange men so long as she had Hermione for a friend. Yes, Hermione chuckled. You even have to ask. Yes, yes, I know. Will you bring me some baked goods tomorrow? Evelyn said hopefully. I'll have Jonathan buy us a lovely dinner, and we can drink a nice bottle of wine. How about it, Hermione? I would love it if you stayed over. Evelyn was very nervous. Hermione was someone she only was with during the day, and had never taken her up on the offer to stay over if she needed in the 3 years that Evelyn had known her. I think, Hermione smiled. That sounds lovely. Wonderful, Evelyn let out a sigh of relief. I'll make sure that Jonathan behaves himself. Namely, doesn't cause a repeat of his usual drunken escapades. Hermione smiled happily to herself. She had never had a slumber party. She was always seen as too weird for the Muggle children, and the witches in her dorm at Hogwarts had never really liked her all that much. Hermione had pretty much been declared cursed the minute that she was stuck in the same dorm as Lavender Brown. They were catty and awful before Lavender and Ron's initial breakup. Hermione really didn't know what was going on with everyone when she was thrown back into Egypt. She heard through the grapevine that Ron and Lavender got married, but Hermione really didn't make any effort to congratulate the two or anything. She did receive an invitation, but there was also an aggressive note from Lavender slipped into the envelope saying to on no certain terms actually come to the wedding. Hermione had rolled her eyes and RSVP'd no. Harry would nod in the hallways of the ministry and politely ask how Hermione was doing. She would give him a polite response and be on her way. There was nobody else. Luna was busy being married to Neville. Ginny. It was best not to even think about Ginny, and there was no one else, just her. Hermione had no desire to find her way back. She was going to stay here forever. The ministry could go shove themselves. If they were going to find Hermione, they would have. Hermione and Evelyn chatted happily about what they should purchase for dinner, and Hermione offered to bring her chess set with her so she could cream Jonathan like a crushed cannoli. Ardith lurked outside the apartment in the street. He knew better than to scale the building to listen in. Only one other Medjai had even tested those waters, and they almost fell off the building, just like the first had. Ardith supposed if there was an open window he could just swing in, but how would he get out again? There was nothing for it. He would just have to wait outside. And wait outside he did, all night. Ardith had been awake for the night watching the door, but no Miss Evans exited. When someone did exit, it was Miss Carnahan ready for work. But Ardith stayed and waited for Miss Evans. He was flummoxed when he saw her entering the building with Miss Carnahan the next evening. Ardith was losing stamina and rubbed his eyes in confusion, but there she was. He sighed. She must have climbed out of a window somewhere. Ardith groaned with frustration. Trust her to climb out a window. Ardith finally walked away. There was really no use in waiting now. He had lost her once already, and his backup should be at the museum now. Best to just let them know where she was, and let them know Miss Evans had found another way out of the building. Hermione grinned as she finally caught full sight of Ardith Bay leaving. He had been following her this entire time. She knew it. Ardith was getting good, just not as good as Hermione. "Why are you smiling so big?" Evelyn said curiously. "Just happy to be spending an evening with chess and wine. Provided that we are able to hide the bottle from Jonathan and prevent him drinking it all while we aren't looking." "Yes," Evelyn sighed. "That is a legitimate concern. Maybe we can distract him with the treats you brought." "Chocolate cake with peanut butter frosting," Hermione said brightly. "It is amazing that I don't weigh twice my original weight with you for a friend," Evelyn said, looking at the plate of cake longingly. "It really is," Hermione laughed. Chapter 12. Ardith rode confidently with the other Medjai. He had been the official chieftain for 3 years. His father had been assisting with matters as a tribal elder, but it was essentially Ardith's responsibility. It had all played out exactly as his father and Hazib had predicted. Ardith rose within the rest of the soldiers' esteem. He was well liked and fair. Ardith was a deeply loved chieftain, even over the short period of time he had led his men. There had been more and more fights for Hamunaptra as the digs throughout Egypt progressed. It was unfortunate that so many remnants of Hamunaptra were being discovered within those digs. It was making their jobs as protectors more and more difficult. Ardith had to hope that the archaeologists would steadily lose those clues to the city itself, and those efforts would steadily decrease. Ardith looked regretfully over the latest skirmish. Thankfully, they had not lost their own soldiers to this fight. The marauders were fighting each other, and his men picked off the leftovers as they fled on their horses. The fight was down to one man staggering towards the desert. Ardith didn't know exactly why he had stopped his men from taking care of him, but there was something about him, something that felt important, so he had left him. Ardith didn't think he would live long anyhow. He would be lost to the desert. Ardith would only scant weeks later come to regret his decision. "I am not getting in that coffin, Jonathan. It's a sarcophagus, Hermione. It could be the king's bed for all I care. There is a dead body, and I do not lay down with dead bodies just for a lark." Hermione faced a clearly depraved Jonathan as he had already climbed right into the sarcophagus. "Then be a lamb, fiancé of mine, and hide," Jonathan said with frustration. "I'll do one better." "See ya," Hermione walked out of the showroom and shut the door firmly behind her with a roll of her eyes. Even the twins had known better than to play with dead bodies. Hermione decided to stroll through one of the newer exhibits. It had some frankly silly life depictions of Seti riding a chariot, but she was curious to see what else was on display. Hermione heard strange, thundering sounds, but after a pause, they went away and she kept on walking. Hermione snorted in amusement at the loud shriek that was clearly Jonathan's prank taking effect. She hoped Evelyn smacked the crap out of him. "Will I never be rid of you?" Hermione turned to see Dr. Bay more flustered than usual. It had been 5 years, yet her and Mr. Bay were as at odds as ever. "And you," Hermione said serenely. "I am just observing magnificent artifacts and, well, really unnecessary wax depictions. Why must history be turned into a dramatic reenactment? Is history not enough?" Terence rubbed the temples on the sides of his head. He did not have the energy to deal with the catastrophic skills of Evelyn Carnahan and the verbal repartee of Hermione Evans all at once. He just threw up his hands and walked away. Hermione's eyebrow raised in bafflement. It was not often that Terence Bay didn't at least try to have the last word. Hermione walked in the direction he had come from, and her mouth dropped in shock. Every single shelf was on the ground. Books littered the floor. Hermione carefully stepped through so as not to step on any of the books. "Hermione!" Evelyn walked up to Hermione with excitement. "Jonathan actually found something. Don't sound so shocked." "I am more than a pretty face, I'll have you know." Hermione was still trying to get over the magnitude of what was formerly the very organized library. "Evelyn, what happened to the library?" Evelyn blushed and flustered in embarrassment. "It was an accident. That is quite an accident. But Hermione, Jonathan found something amazing. He found a map to Hamunaptra." Hermione couldn't describe the feeling that settled in her blood. The very name Hamunaptra settled coldly in her throat. "Hamunaptra," Hermione said dumbly. "The city of the dead," Evelyn said with the biggest grin to match the most macabre subject. "Don't go." Hermione couldn't describe how she felt. It was simply a very bad feeling. "Oh, Hermione, we have to go. This is the discovery of the century. And there is bound to be gold," Jonathan interjected. Hermione stood numbly as they walked past her. When Hermione came to herself, the two of them were gone. She felt adrift. There was absolutely no reason Hermione should feel so panicked over just a name. She had barely even heard of Hamunaptra. And yet, it was like when her and Harry had entered Bagshaw's home and were faced with a snake masquerading in her skin. It was just a horrible feeling Hermione couldn't describe. Hermione knelt down and picked up a book. She was being silly. Nothing was going to go wrong. "Hermione, I have a huge favor to ask of you." Hermione was picking up and stacking books when Evelyn and Jonathan came back. "And what would that be?" Hermione smiled. "Would you clean up the library for me and cover my duties while I go on an expedition? You're really the only one I can ask, and I need Jonathan to help me because Dr. Bay—" Evelyn had to take deep breaths. She was so upset. "Burned the map to Hamunaptra, and now we need to find another way there." Evelyn was babbling at warp speed, and Hermione was woefully behind. "Dr. Bay burned the map. On accident," Jonathan growled. Hermione didn't buy it. "So would you please take care of things while I'm gone?" Hermione was tempted to say no. If only so that Evelyn wouldn't go to Hamunaptra, but Hermione could see it in Evelyn's eyes. Nothing was keeping her from going to Hamunaptra. And if what they were saying was true, they didn't even have a map anymore. What were the chances that they would still make it to Hamunaptra without it? "All right. I'll withstand the esteemed presence of Mr. Bay while you go off adventuring." Evelyn actually squealed with delight and hugged Hermione desperately. Thank you so much." And they were off. Hermione blew out a huge breath and observed the mess around her. Well, at least she had something to do while they were gone. Ardith was in Cairo. It had been 2 years since he had been here. He had received panicked communications from Uncle Terence concerning Hamunaptra. Ardith had 30 Medjai soldiers awaiting instructions just outside the city. He prayed he wouldn't need them. Ardith walked quickly through the museum to his uncle's office. Terence didn't know what to do. It had never occurred to him that one day, the daughter and son of his close friends would one day be the ones to be eliminated for their cause. It was breaking something inside of him that he didn't know was even there. Terence didn't want to, and he had no choice. There was nothing he could do to keep Evelyn and Jonathan Carnahan from going to Hamunaptra if they were unwilling to listen to reason, or a map that had been burnt to a crisp. Miss Evans, does she plan to go with them? Ardith felt his heart clench at the thought, but shoved it deep into the back of his mind where he couldn't see it. I don't know, Terence said with frustration. I haven't heard that she is going. Miss Evans certainly wasn't here when they brought the map to me, but where those two go, Miss Evans is rarely far behind. Ardith nodded in thought. We will have eyes on them in case they leave the city. Hopefully, we are worrying for nothing. Oh, Terence suddenly burst out. Would you please help me with something before you go? Somehow, Miss Carnahan managed to knock down every single bookshelf in the library in one fell swoop, and if she is off gallivanting and finding a way to Hamunaptra, I need help writing them. I doubt the Carnahans will be leaving this very night. Ardith nodded and followed Terence to the library. However, Terence stopped cold in shock at the sight that greeted them. Every single shelf was upright, the books were in piles, and Hermione Evans was sifting through them with her sleeves rolled up and her hair in a bun on top of her head, in the middle of it all. How did you get all the shelves upright? Hermione looked up from the book she was attempting to find the missing page to. I hired a big man named Moose, Hermione returned sarcastically. In actuality, Hermione had used magic to right the shelves, and determined it was best to do the rest by hand for appearance sake. If she occasionally fixed a book beyond repair with magic, no one would be the wiser. If she was using magic for everything, it would take a day or two max. But that would hardly get past the anal doctor Terence Bay. Both the men looked at her in disbelief, and Hermione sighed. Jonathan, help me. Jonathan Carnahan, Ardith asked with disbelief. After several occasions observing the man, he didn't seem like the masculine type. Yes, Hermione was going to pretend that it didn't sound completely ridiculous. It was a funny thought, Jonathan writing the shelves. It would definitely be accompanied by drinking and a lot of complaining from Jonathan. Hermione went back to focusing on her books. It was her word against their disbelief. Jonathan could lie with the best of them, and probably wouldn't bat an eye before lying for Hermione, even without any words needing to be said. They had an agreement to go with each other's bullshit in a pinch. Jonathan had pretty much become Hermione's brother from another mother. Fiancé jokes aside. Hermione had found her family in Jonathan and Evelyn, and she hoped desperately that they were not going to actually make their way to Hamunaptra. So you burned a priceless artifact, Hermione said conversationally. Terence tightened up immediately. He could feel it again, the feeling of pressure in the air. Ardith did too. He never understood before, but now he felt stupid for not sensing it. The air was thick like breathing in smoke. Is that the sort of silly mistake a curator would make? Hermione turned her eyes on Terence, and he felt like he was staring into the eyes of a feared interrogator. Happens to the best of us, Terence gulped. Hermione's eyes narrowed. He was hiding something. Does it? Hermione challenged. Ardith instinctively put his hand on the hilt of his sword. Hermione's eyes suddenly shifted to his sword hand. A soldier. Ardith hadn't ever before seen her as a hardened soldier, but she was. Hardened and capable. Ardith's heart beat faster as Miss Evans looked up into his eyes. Ardith's face was shielded by cloth. He knew she didn't recognize him, and Ardith almost didn't recognize her. But Hermione Evans was somehow more beautiful and lethal, like a lioness assessing her prey. Then it was gone. Ardith and Terence could breathe again, and Hermione Evans was paying full attention again to her books. I suppose so. Terence nodded numbly before walking briskly out the door with Ardith following. Evelyn and Jonathan had agreed to meet Hermione at their usual cafe after Hermione had worked Evelyn's shift at the museum. Hermione prepared herself for the worst. but she hadn't prepared herself for a smelly, unkempt man of questionable origin to accompany them. Hermione, this is Mr. O'Connell. Hermione was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And you need me to lend him my bath and razor, Jonathan snorted, but immediately shut up as the man in question looked threateningly in his direction. He is going to show me and Jonathan the way to Hamunaptra. Hermione's heart took a sickening drop. Hamunaptra, Hermione's voice came out weak and desperate. Please don't go. It was so quiet Evelyn almost didn't catch it. This was the second time that Hermione had begged Evelyn not to go. Finally, someone with common sense. It sounded almost silly hearing those words coming from Mr. O'Connell. Hermione didn't know where the Carnahans had found him, but he wasn't wrong. Hermione, Evelyn chastised. I didn't take you as one to believe in myths and rumors and hokum. Hermione felt red-hot anger and desperation brewing in her soul. Hermione did not appreciate being put on the same level as Professor Trelawney and superstition in general. I am not, but I will tell you right now this is a bad idea. I can't tell you why, and I can't tell you how, but I can tell you that I have never heard any of the myths you are talking about, and I am begging you please don't go. Evelyn's face flushed with anger. I am going. I need to prove myself to the Bembridge scholars. This is what I need. The Bembridge scholars, Hermione burst out. Hermione stood in anger. Those hacks. Yes, they had discovered most artifacts in the academic world, but that was because they were the Gilderoy Lockharts of the Muggle world. The Bembridge scholars are a group of stuffy old men sitting around a table with sticks shoved up their asses, deciding who is academic and who isn't based on a mere whim. Who the hell gives a shit what the Bembridge scholars think? Hermione was good and angry. She had never been so infuriated with Evelyn. Fine, go. Go to a cursed place that will probably kill you. I will continue to do your job while you're gone. Come find me if you actually live to tell the tale. Jonathan's mouth dropped in shock, and Evelyn was close to angry tears, but Hermione didn't care. She grabbed her coat. It was awful meeting you, Mr. O'Connell. Likewise, he said automatically, and Hermione stormed off. Ardith was lurking in the nearby alley and couldn't believe what he had just heard. Miss Evans was trying to talk Miss Carnahan out of going to Hamunaptra. He couldn't quite believe it, but it seemed like it wasn't going to do any good. The Carnahans and Mr. O'Connell were determined to set out the next morning. They would have to deal with them. Ardith hoped that he and his men would be able to deter them before they were forced to take drastic measures, if not for their sakes, for Miss Evans' sake. Ardith followed close behind her until she stopped in an alley and burst into tears. They were the type of sobs that were gut-wrenching and broken with grief and loss. Hermione didn't know how to feel when sandalwood-scented arms wrapped themselves around her. But it had been so long since she had been held just for comfort that Hermione completely broke down. She missed her father and her mother. Hermione missed Harry desperately. Why did nobody ever listen? Evelyn was walking to her potential death, and it was the same old story. Hermione was being too cautious and too stuck in the rules, and she knew. Hermione knew that something horrific was going to happen, and she was powerless to stop it because Evelyn was intent on being just as stupid as the rest of humanity. Ardith held her, and Miss Evans clung to him like her life depended on it and sobbed. He didn't know how, but Miss Evans knew that Hamunaptra was probably going to kill her best friend and fiancé, and she was steadily breaking his resolve with every moment. Was there some way to spare them? Maybe they could sabotage their transport and hopefully deter their journey. Hermione's crying eventually slowed, and she backed away from the person she could only assume was Ardith Bay. It was hard to recognize him, but his smell was exactly the same as it had been, just replaced with a man who dwarfed her with his bulk. Sorry, Hermione muttered quietly. Hermione looked up and smirked a little. Still haven't stopped wearing black, Ardith chuckled. He resisted the urge to reach out to her. It suits me. Tell, Hermione started shakily. Tell your mother and father I said hi. Ardith looked at her in surprise. All right. Thanks for letting me borrow your shoulder. Hermione didn't say another word. She just walked away, and Ardith was left in her wake. So, they have found a guide to Hamunaptra. It appears so. And Miss Evans is against it. Terence did not know what to think about this turn of events. Miss Evans was the thorn in his side. She did not agree with him, and yet she did. Miss Evans was trying to talk Evelyn Carnahan out of going to Hamunaptra and even got into a row with her about it. Do you think Miss Carnahan will listen? No, I'm afraid not. Ardith wished she would. He couldn't get Miss Evans' heartbreak out of his mind. They were both in tears by the end of the meeting. Terence nodded. We will just have to hope that cutting off their transport will deter them then. Ardith breathed a sigh of relief that Uncle Terence was thinking along the same lines. I hope so too. Evelyn had never been so upset in her life. Hermione had never gotten angry with her, not once. Hermione was all sarcasm and intelligence and fun. But today, Evelyn felt like she had been gut-punched. Are you all right, old girl? Jonathan was showing a rare moment of concern for her. We don't have to go if you don't want to, Evie. Evie knew that this was a lot coming from Jonathan because he wanted to go just as much as Evelyn did. She shook her head. We have to go. When are we ever going to get a chance like this again? You should listen to your friend. Evelyn bristled at the words from O'Connell and became more resolute than ever. Just be at the pier tomorrow, Evelyn said haughtily, and stood up with Jonathan to go prepare for their trip. Evelyn slid O'Connell some money. Take a bath while you are at it. O'Connell slid the money back to her. I don't need your money, O'Connell said, with a humorless smile before downing his coffee and walking away from them. Evelyn pushed back her surprise and how upset she was. She focused on all the excitement. They were going to Hamunaptra. Evelyn was shocked to see a frowning Hermione at the pier waiting for them. Hermione held up her hands. Peace. Hermione pulled several necklaces from her pocket and placed one around Evelyn's neck. Keep this on you. Hermione had put several safety charms on them. Hopefully they would give Evelyn some safety and give her time to come to her senses. Hermione placed one around Jonathan's neck also. Jonathan smiled brightly at her. He was glad she was here. It would be terrible leaving for Hamunaptra with the way they had left things the day before. Hermione. Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat. Don't do anything stupid, Hermione pleaded. That is all I ask. There is a grain of truth in every myth, and I don't want to have to bring you back from the dead just so I can whack you for your stupidity. Hermione hugged Evelyn. I promise, Evelyn said tearfully. Hermione pulled away and looked around. Where is your guide? She held up another necklace. I brought him one too, Mr. O'Connell. If he actually shows up, Evelyn scoffed. He will. He's an American. His word is his word. I know the type, Jonathan said confidently. Well, Evelyn huffed. I think he's rude, dirty, a complete scoundrel. I don't like him one bit. Anyone I know. Evelyn whirled around to see an incredibly attractive, strapping American man. Oh, Evelyn breathed out. Hello. Hermione snickered a little to herself. Oh, indeed. Strapping day, O'Connell. Yeah, strapping. Hermione nodded in understanding to see him not so subtly checking for his wallet. You two have a past, Jonathan, Hermione asked with amusement. Jonathan had the presence of mind to be embarrassed. Oh, I would never steal from a partner. Hermione held out the charm to O'Connell, and he took it with a raised eyebrow. For my peace of mind, Hermione said simply. O'Connell nodded with confusion, but placed it over his head anyhow. Oh, sorry for the Hermione's face broke out into a slow smile as it became clear to her that O'Connell had punched Jonathan. Oh no, it happens all the time. I'm sure it does. Jonathan glared at the grinning Hermione. Some loving fiancé you are, Jonathan said huffily. I gave you a protection charm. How much more loving do you want to be? I'm not massaging your feet, Hermione said with a snort. Mr. O'Connell, Evelyn interrupted Hermione and Jonathan's snarking. Can you assure me that this isn't all some sort of flim-flam, because if it is, I am warning you. You're warning me. Listen, lady, my commander believed in this so much that without orders, my whole garrison went out to find that damn city. And when we got there, all we found was sand and blood. Let me get your bags for you. Hermione looked at Evelyn with a deep frown. Evelyn didn't meet her eyes for a minute. I'm sure we will be fine, Evelyn attempted to assure Hermione. That is so reassuring, Hermione said sarcastically. Evelyn watched Mr. O'Connell's behind as he walked up the plank. Try not to get engaged while you're gone. Didn't you hear, Hermione? He's rude, dirty, and a complete scoundrel. Nothing to like there at all, Jonathan said with a grin. Evelyn gave each of them a look. Great good morning to all. Hermione couldn't hold back the sneer on her face at the putrid gentleman. Oh no, what are you doing here? Evelyn said with horror. I'm here to protect my investment. Thank you very much. Jonathan and Evelyn sighed. Well, we best be going. We will be careful, Hermione, I promise. Hermione hugged Evelyn and Jonathan tightly. You better, and try not to get fleas from. Hermione gestured to the putrid gentleman in question. That is a legitimate concern, Jonathan responded dryly. Chapter 13. She should have gone with them. Hermione should have gone with them to make sure they didn't get killed, or at least put a tracking charm on them. Oh, why did she not put a tracking charm on those morons? Hermione was ferociously and angrily working her way through the massacred library like a madwoman. She didn't even go home, which certainly helped when Hermione needed to magically fix a book in the middle of the night, but wasn't helping Dr. Bay's irritating brand of concern. Go home, woman. Hermione looked up with a raised eyebrow on day 3 of not going home. The library was almost back in order, and she was just doing her last look through to make sure that everything was in the correct place. Hermione didn't know how he was aware that she wasn't going home. She looked the same as she always did, but then she remembered. That's right, Hermione exclaimed. You have an unhealthy habit of having random men watching my every move. It is not normal to not sleep for 3 days straight, Terence Bay continued undeterred. It is my normal. I was just fixing the disaster the library was in, rather than reading or spending time with my cat. Yes. But the disaster is gone, and now I need a break from you. Or are you just wanting to discuss me in the privacy of your study with whoever has been watching me work in this library without the threat of me walking in unannounced? Nail right on the head. You still need to go home, Terence flustered and blustered. All right, dear Terence. I will do my final look through tomorrow. Try not to ruin my hard work. Me ruin it? Terence was red with anger. Of course. Where do you think Evelyn learned it from? You. Just leave. My pleasure, Hermione grinned brightly. See you tomorrow, Terence, old boy. Oh, Allah, Terence looked to the sky. Did you send this woman down to earth just to test my patience? Because whatever I've done, I am so sorry. Terence sighed and headed to his study. Were you able to distract them from Hamunaptra? No, Hazib sighed. We will have to deal with them. Terence rubbed his hands over his face. What will I tell Miss Evans when they don't come back? Terence said wearily. Hazib was sorry for it. Many of the Medjai were. They all thought of Miss Evans fondly. She had given them a lot of joyful stories to tell in a job that wore on them all. Now they had to take the people away that she loved dearly. She already suspects me. Miss Evans will know. Hazib patted Terence on the back. Maybe they will see sense or change their minds. One would hope. O'Connell looked at the necklace around his neck critically. There was something strange with this thing. He just knew it. During the battle on the boat, Rick just thought he was lucky not to get shot. But then, during the fight with the desert men, a horseman shot a gun at him. It should have hit Rick right in the chest. But instead, there was a strange pulse of energy, and the bullet ricocheted away from him. O'Connell had been shocked, but far too busy trying to stay alive to give it much thought until afterwards, and none of them had been hurt, even during the sword fight. O'Connell didn't have a single scratch, and neither did Evelyn or Jonathan. Evie, have you noticed anything strange about your necklace? Evelyn gave him a look, but then lifted the necklace away from her neck. Not that she had noticed. Like what? Like O'Connell didn't know how to put it. Like it is actually protecting you. A necklace couldn't do that, Evelyn scoffed before taking the bottle of Glenlivet from Jonathan and taking a swig. Evie, that's mine. It's stolen, Jonathan. Not like he's going to miss it. Jonathan muttered. Evelyn continued to steal gulps from the bottle until she was quite tipsy. "All right, Mr. O'Connell, teach me to fight." Rick shook his head, but stood up anyways. "Teach me to kick some ass," Evelyn said with silly bravado. "Miss Carnahan," Rick playfully chastised. "Where did you learn such language?" "Miss Evans," Evelyn grinned. "She must be quite the dame," Rick chuckled before putting his fists up. "Now raise your fists like this." Terence had to hand it to Miss Evanston. The woman was an efficient worker. Evelyn was as well, but Miss Carnahan made so many blunders due to her clumsiness. A lot of her time was spent fixing those blunders. In contrast, Miss Evans was too efficient. Terence had nothing left for her to do. So instead, Miss Evans was sitting in his office staring at him. "Miss Evans, just go home." "Nope," Hermione said with a grin. "Evelyn told me to fill her shift, so that is exactly what I'll do. Plus, I thought I'd put myself in your assigned sentry's point of view and just watch your every move to ascertain anything nefarious and/or devious." Terence slammed his forehead so hard against his desk, his hat went flying off. "How do you expect me to work like this?" "That's a good question." "How do you expect me to have a decent conversation with men following me around all the time and listening in on my every word? I'm truly curious." Damn her. Damn her straight to hell. Curse Evelyn for asking Hermione Evans to fill in for her. Terence didn't care that she turned out to be amazingly competent and more than intelligent for the job. Miss Evans was absolutely insufferable, and Terence couldn't even argue because she coupled that with being infuriatingly right. Hermione nodded with satisfaction at his continued silence, and Terence fought to ignore her while he worked. He quite literally leapt from his chair and actively pushed her out the door when the clock finally struck the end of her working hours. Hermione laughed loudly as the door was literally slammed in her face. "I'll see you tomorrow," Hermione sang. The door burst open again. "Oh no, I won't. Tomorrow is Evelyn's day off," Terence said victoriously and slammed the door yet again. It wasn't lost on Hermione that Dr. Bay was acting strangely. He kept looking at her guiltily, like he had something to hide. Hermione had cast several charms on him under the table while she had been sitting there, including a tracking charm. She didn't need to be around to keep an eye on him. Hermione smiled victoriously to herself before going to the ladies' room. She went directly to the window, opened it, and then promptly apparated home. The Medjai stayed outside that bathroom for at least an hour. Finally, he crept into the ladies' room and sighed with frustration to see the window open and no Miss Evans. "I wasn't even able to track her leaving the museum this time," Ollie groaned. It had happened. The creature was awake. Ardith's men had gone into the cursed city to try to recover any of the remaining survivors, but unfortunately, their fates were not looking bright. Ardith couldn't hold back his rage when the Carnahans and the Americans ran out of the tomb. This wouldn't have happened if they had just listened to reason. "I told you to leave or die. You refused, and now you may have killed us all, for you have unleashed a creature that we have feared for nearly 3,000 years." Evelyn gulped guiltily. Hermione had said she had a bad feeling. Damn did Evelyn wish she had been wrong. "Relax. I got him." Evelyn looked at Rick in disbelief. That thing was already dead. No mortal weapon can kill this creature. He is not of this world. Oh, and when they brought out poor Burns, Evelyn could have killed herself for reading that book. "You bastards, what did you do to him?" "Saved him. Saved him before the creature could finish his work. Leave quickly before he finishes you all. Allah, Imshi, we must now go on the hunt and try to find a way to kill him. I already told you I got him. Know this. This creature is the bringer of death. He will never eat. He will never sleep. He will never stop." Evelyn had difficulty really grasping what was going on. Men in black were telling her that what? The end of the world was coming. The home die. Men in black. Men in black. "Wait a minute." Ardith stopped briefly. He was irritated and didn't have time to answer a million questions. "You are the men in black. You're the men that have been following Hermione around for the last 5 years." Ardith didn't let the steel leave his gaze. "Yes. Miss Evans has concerned us for a long time." "Why?" Evelyn was confused. Why would Hermione concern you? Hermione is a bit odd at times, but I have never known her to do anything bad. Not in the entire time I've known her. And she certainly has never tried to come here. Hermione was upset that I did. I know, I was there for your argument, Ardith said simply, and I don't have time to answer unimportant questions. And he walked away. Evelyn, we have to go. Evelyn followed Rick, but she couldn't shake off that nagging question. Why were they following Hermione? Hermione woke up and knew that something was going to happen. There was something off. And then she went to make her tea, poured it, and blood came out of the pot. Hermione couldn't believe it. She dipped her finger in and she knew. Something was going horribly wrong. Hermione ran to Harry's water bowl. That was also blood. She had never gotten ready so fast in her entire life. Hermione walked out into the alleyway, and it was absolute chaos. Fire was literally raining from the heavens. The vagrants were screaming and running for cover. It was nothing that Hermione had ever seen. How was there no record of this in history? What was Hermione supposed to do? Something magical must be the cause behind this, but what could it possibly be? Hermione did what she usually did in these situations. She went to the library, and since there were no significant magical libraries in Cairo, Hermione headed straight for the museum. No, Terence said the minute he saw Miss Evans walk in. Today is your day off, and besides, if there was a reason for a day off, fiery hail is the reason. I'm not here to torment you, Hermione sighed. I'm here to look for a book in the library. Water turns to blood and fiery hail falls from the sky, and your immediate response is to pop on over to the library. My response to everything is to go to the library. Ardith lurked in the shadows. Miss Evans was all right. That was a relief. Just go home. The library is closed. Hermione did not know what to do with her frustration. She was not made to sit around and do nothing. Hermione had to know what the hell was going on. I need to figure this all out. Hermione burst out with frustration. I assure you the answer is not in that library. And you know what is going on to know it is not in that library. Terence faltered, and Hermione finally looked at him. You do know what is going on. I do not. I just know. Things like this just defy explanation. Now please go home and be safe. Terence was pleading now. He really needed Miss Evans to leave. She was far too perceptive for her own good, and Terence needed her to not be in his face so he could deal with this. Fine, I'll go home, Hermione said carefully. She would go home. Go home and get ready to follow Terence Bay the minute that man took a single step outside this museum. Terence breathed a sigh of relief when she was finally gone. How does she do that? Terence said tiredly. I can't get anything past that woman. The same could be said for my mother. Terence gripped his heart in alarm. Ardith Bay, Terence patted his chest a few times. Have you been taking lessons from Miss Evans? What happened in Hamunaptra? The creature is awakened, Ardith said grimly. I gathered as much, Terence said sarcastically. What are we going to do to take care of it? There is only one person I know that can give us any answers. The entire Hamunaptra group rounded the corner and came across the Medjai. You, Miss Carnahan. Gentlemen, Jonathan could feel the dark-robed desert gentleman staring at him, no glaring at him. He wasn't glaring at anyone else, just Jonathan. What is he doing here? The man finally turned away from him to look at Evie. Do you really want to know, or would you prefer to just shoot us? Terence asked sassily. He was insufferable at the best and worst of times, it seemed. After what I just saw, I'm willing to go on a little faith here. Rick holstered his weapons. Jonathan was seriously feeling threatened. Why was he glaring so hard at him? It's not as if Jonathan was the one who had read from the bloody book. Jonathan finally lowered his gun when he was elbowed by Evie, but kept close to O'Connell just in case. It was after dark when Hermione's wand buzzed. She jumped up and immediately grabbed her broom. At least that horrifying and absolutely awful crash course in flying with Kingsley wouldn't be put to waste. Hermione apparated to an alley just outside the museum and immediately had to take flight when she apparated right in the middle of a mob of people. Hermione didn't know what the hell she had walked into. She flew straight up into the air, with an ill-fated man covered in boils hanging onto the tail of her broom. Hermione spun, and finally had to almost run into a building to knock him off. She landed on a nearby roof and pulled out her wand to check Terence's location. He had been on the move, but had suddenly stopped. Hermione began flying in the direction that her wand directed her to, and when she got there, she immediately acted out of instinct and alarm. Terence was surrounded by what looked to be boil covered in fairy chanting Imhotep over and over again. He was slashing at them with a sword, but they were quickly overtaking him. Hermione sent stunning spell after stunning spell. She made sure to hit Dr. Bay when he turned to see where the spells were coming from. When there was finally no more to take care of, Hermione flew down to check on him. Terence was alive, bruised and cut up, but alive. Ardith watched Jonathan Carnahan numbly from the back seat of the car. His uncle was gone. Miss Evans' best friend was going to be sacrificed, and he had no idea if Miss Evans herself was okay. Ardith just had to hope that she made it home without coming across the creature. And if it wouldn't be so heartbreaking for Miss Evans, he would be hoping that Jonathan Carnahan conveniently died so he wouldn't marry her. Rick noticed the frankly odd behavior that the Medjai warrior was displaying towards Jonathan. He really did not like Jonathan. Had he picked his pocket in the past or something? Terence Bay woke up in his study at the museum. Do you usually fall asleep on the steps of the museum entrance? Terence jolted upright to look at Hermione Evans. How was he alive? Terence had been losing the fight. He knew he would when he stayed behind. Terence should be dead. Hello, Earth to Terence. Asleep on the steps to the museum. Hermione looked at him like he was stupid. Yes. Did you get in a bar fight or something? Speaking of fights, what the hell happened here last night? The doors were broken down and it looks like a riot went through this place. Acting aside, Hermione really wanted to know the answer to that question. Why, yes. Looters. Looters attacked the museum. Did they take anything? Terence stood up shakily. Looters that were some sort of inferi. A dark wizard must have decided to have some fun with the Muggle populace. There were really no actual laws in place when it came to the separation of magic and Muggles in Cairo. Hermione had been shocked when she arrived to see that, but essentially, Hermione was a British witch. She had carefully abided by British laws while she was in Egypt. Running around saying you were a witch wasn't particularly wise in any case. Hermione was still trying to figure out exactly how a wizard had gotten away with the magic she had seen displayed the day prior. She had never seen anything like it, and had been combing through any books she possessed on the subject after Dr. Bay had run her out of the library the day prior. She still thought Dr. Bay must be some sort of squib. Hermione couldn't shake that feeling that he knew exactly what was going on. Or maybe he was a wizard, but that didn't make a lick of sense. Hermione was certain she would have seen it by now. Terence felt like he was being dissected. He could see the wheels in Miss Evans' brain turning furiously. Are you a squib, Dr. Bay? Terence looked at Miss Evans with puzzlement. She was clearly serious and waiting for an answer, coupling that with actually referring to him as doctor. I have no conceivable idea of what that is, Miss Evans. Hermione watched him with narrow eyes. What is a squib? Hermione finally shrugged. Never mind. You would know if you were one. But what is it? Terence persisted. Why was fire raining from the sky yesterday? Hermione countered. Terence paused. I don't know, he finally lied. Then I don't know what a squib is either, Hermione said brightly. I'd better get to work. We have a lot of cleanup to do. Terence sighed with frustration. She knew he knew. It didn't change the fact that he couldn't and more importantly shouldn't tell her. Absolutely infuriating. She lives. Hermione hugged Evelyn tightly. She was truly so happy to find out that Evelyn was alive and well. Hermione had been sitting at their usual cafe going out of her mind, and suddenly they were there. Alive and well. Oh, Hermione, I need to listen to your hunches from now on. The boat sank on the way there, and a myriad of other dangerous things. Jonathan and O'Connell had made Evelyn swear not to tell Miss Evans what had happened, and she had finally agreed after hearing their arguments. It was too fantastical to believe. And even though Hermione had begged her not to go just because of a bad feeling, it didn't mean that she would believe that Evelyn had brought a priest back from the dead. And secretly, Evelyn was relieved that she wouldn't have to tell Hermione. Evelyn was ashamed. Utterly and completely ashamed of the way she had acted when she had scoffed at Hermione's concerns. Everyone could have died, and Evelyn was the dancing fool that had caused the whole thing. I'm just happy you're okay. I didn't expect you back so soon. Aren't these expeditions supposed to take ages? We kept running into trouble, Evelyn flustered. And we found some meaningful artifacts. We figured it was best to quit while we were ahead. Oh, Evelyn grabbed Hermione's arm excitedly. O'Connell kissed me. Evelyn, Hermione whacked Evelyn on the arm. I told you not to get engaged. I'm not, Evelyn blushed. Coming from you, you are as good as engaged. They also rode the same camel coming back, Jonathan interjected with a sickened expression. And Jonathan tried to kiss a camel, Evelyn interjected in retaliation. I'm amazed you could see anything with your face stuck to O'Connell's, Jonathan said petulantly. Hermione just grinned even bigger at the sibling bickering. That's desperation, Hermione said dryly. Hey, I'll have you know I am a very rich man now. We can now buy that mansion we've always dreamed of, my love. Rich, so you found what you were looking for? Hermione was honestly surprised. And more. O'Connell walked up looking positively starstruck. Evelyn giggled, actually giggled. Hermione was as weirded out as Jonathan was grossed out. It was strange seeing Evelyn so goopy. Nice, just incredibly strange. Get a room, would you? Jonathan grumbled and turned to Hermione. They have been like this since we left. And it made you want to kiss a camel. I did not try to kiss a camel. My sources say otherwise. Hermione grinned. She looked around the cafe. It was so weird that everything went right back to normal after the strangeness only days ago. No wonder there were no laws against muggles knowing about magic. They simply didn't care or let it affect them. If this was England, a giant cover-up would have been needed. Obliviation spells for the entire city. Someone's head would have been on the chopping block. And Hermione had gone to magical Cairo to see what the witches and wizards were saying. They just commented on how strange it was and went about their days. No one was arrested. Nothing. It was absolutely unbelievable. Hermione still had absolutely no idea what had happened. She knew that the men in black had some idea, but past that absolutely nothing. So, you'll be going back to your job now, Evelyn. Terence Bay will certainly be relieved. The day before yesterday, I just stared at him once I finished my work to make him crazy. Yes, Evelyn tried to sound upbeat. Like she didn't know that Terence was gone. I'm sure he will be relieved. Evelyn looked morose. Don't be too sad, Hermione joked. There was more than enough work at the museum when I left this morning. O'Connell furrowed in confusion. This morning? Yes, Hermione said matter-of-factly. I went to work this morning. Mr. Bay was passed out on the steps. The place was trashed, though, some sort of looting incident. In actuality, Hermione had carried him with the assistance of a feather lightning charm and placed him on his couch. Thankfully, her stunning spell had reached him on time, and he had no conceivable idea what Hermione's part actually was in his being saved. Evelyn tried not to bounce with excitement and joy. Oh, you know Hermione. I'm just so excited to show Dr. Bay my findings. Do you mind us popping off early to show him? I guess. They were acting strange, Evelyn especially. Yes, we should definitely rub it in the old codger's face after he burned up our map, Jonathan helpfully added. Come to dinner at our house tomorrow, Hermione. We can all have a nice meal. I'll invite Dr. Bay and you can make him absolutely batty. All right, Hermione smiled with uncertainty. I'll bring some dessert. Ah, bless you, goddess of baked goods, Jonathan said gratefully. Her croissants, they are absolutely amazing, O'Connell. You are coming, aren't you, O'Connell, old boy? I'd never turn down a warm meal, Rick said good-naturedly. I'll see you tomorrow. Hermione waved at them with an awkward smile as they dashed off. Well, that was weird. Terence was attempting to carefully remove artifacts from a broken display case when Ardith started squeezing the life out of him. Ardith had traveled to the city after notifying the tribe in order to get his uncle's affairs in order and to find him alive doing his job like always. "Unhand me, you buffoon," Terence wheezed. "How did you survive?" "You were surrounded, dear uncle." "Well, I actually don't know." Terence straightened his robes. Suddenly, there were flashes of red light, and Imhotep's zombies started dropping like flies. I thought I was a goner when I was hit with one also. But then I woke up on my sofa, and to Miss Evans' snark. "Father will be so happy to hear you are alive," Ardith grinned joyfully. "And Basma suitably disappointed," Terence snarked before he was nearly bowled over by an enthusiastic Evelyn. "You're alive. Let go of me, you infernal woman." Evelyn backed away with a sheepish grin. "I'm happy you are not zombie food, old boy," Jonathan said earnestly. "Yeah," O'Connell patted Terence on the back so hard he almost fell into the display case. "Glad you are all right. You must come to dinner at our home to celebrate. Both of you. Hermione will be there, so we won't be able to discuss what happened, but that also means that there will be an absolutely amazing dessert." "Please, we would be happy to," Ardith interrupted before his uncle could refuse, which earned him a nasty glare. "I have work to do. I am staying here. Thank you for the offer and not succeeding in ending the world." "Good day." Ardith shook his head at his uncle's manners and chuckled as he stomped away. "I tried." Ardith shrugged to Evelyn apologetically. "You will still come, though," Evelyn pleaded. Ardith hesitated. He wanted to, and he absolutely didn't. Being close to Miss Evans for an evening sounded heavenly, but watching her and Jonathan together sounded like hell. But he had already promised. "Of course, my friend." "Wonderful. See you then, pal." Ardith sighed as soon as they had left. He was going to regret this. Chapter 14. Ardith was wondering how he was going to escape attending this dinner. He had Miss Evans in his arms not even a week ago, and Ardith just couldn't get over his desire to do so again. And Jonathan Carnahan, how was Ardith not going to punch the rat bastard? He was ashamed to say that he had given into the temptation of looking into Jonathan Carnahan. Jonathan was a drunkard and always in the arms of a different woman, and at the same time, he had the audacity to continue to court Miss Evans. Ardith was afraid he would snap and use him for knife practice. And yet, Ardith found himself dressing with more care than usual and in colored robes for once with no head covering. "Ardith, thank you so much for coming." Evelyn welcomed Ardith in. He handed her a fragrant bag of coffee. "Thank you for having me." "Thank you so much. O'Connell and Hermione haven't arrived yet. Why don't you sit with Jonathan while I make you some tea?" Ardith smiled, but felt like cursing, as did Jonathan. The old chap's glares had not let up their entire acquaintance. Jonathan felt like a bug that Ardith wanted to crush. Usually, Jonathan was able to win people over with time, but it seemed he had done something to seriously offend him. Jonathan immediately stood up and poured himself a generous amount of scotch. "Do not drink too much, Jonathan," Evelyn warned with a threatening finger, "or I will put Hermione in charge of getting you to bed." Jonathan shivered from the memories. Hermione was not a nice person to get you to bed after a night of heavy drinking. She had no patience and wouldn't hesitate to do anything short of kneeing you in the groin. Unless, of course, you got handsy, and suddenly that was on the table as well. "I shall behave myself, dear sister." Jonathan nearly wet himself when he turned again to see the desert warrior frowning so hard at him Jonathan thought his face would break. "How's Hamanaptra, old chap?" "Still buried," Ardith said emotionlessly. "No mummies have risen since our last meeting," Jonathan continued, desperate for any topic of conversation. "No." Jonathan felt like he could hear crickets all the from the Nile. So Jonathan took a fortifying gulp. "You married, old chap?" "No," Ardith said with a raise of an eyebrow. Jonathan's attempts at conversation were far from impressive, and Ardith decided to just go for it and ask what he wanted to know. "And when will you be marrying Miss Evans?" he said as casually as possible. Jonathan's mind spluttered to a stop. Marrying Hermione. As it turns out, Hermione had decided not to tell Jonathan anything about the general misunderstanding of their upcoming nuptials. Far better to spring it on him when he least expected it. When Jonathan flustered while turning red. He was spared continuing by a knock on the door. Evelyn quickly placed Ardith's tea next to him, stole Jonathan's glass of scotch to pour it in her potted plant, and rushed to the door, only narrowly avoiding face planting along the way. If a gentleman deserves a drink, it's when he finds out he is engaged. Jonathan, what are you babbling about? Evelyn frowned. O'Connell and Hermione had arrived at about the same time to a very confused group of people. Ardith was completely flummoxed, finding out they were engaged. They had been talking about it non-stop. They were clearly engaged. Jonathan was making his way back to the bottle of scotch. He didn't care if Hermione kneed him the balls or poked him in the eye, damn it, he was drinking. And Evelyn was trying to greet the two of them while stopping Jonathan from drinking any more. Rick, Evelyn kissed him on the cheek. I'm so happy to see you. Hermione, you look positively lovely. Jonathan, put down that bottle this instant. Hermione walked in wearing a silk gold dress, and Ardith lost his breath. It was the first time he had ever seen her wear anything other than her usually black and red ensemble, and she was stunning. Hermione froze the minute she saw Ardith. Frankly, Hermione had not gotten a good glimpse of Ardith in 3 years. He was always wearing that head covering of his, and other than an embarrassing crying session, Hermione hadn't really beheld him in all that time. Ardith was just as attractive as Hermione had known he would become. Just, in general, a damn fine specimen of a man that Hermione immediately had lost all ability to converse with just by looking at him. Hermione, may I introduce Ardith Bay? Evelyn said with a big smile. Ah, Hermione desperately cleared her throat. We've met. Hermione slightly blushed in embarrassment. Yes, I know he's probably followed you before, but you didn't know his name, Evelyn reasoned. Actually, she did, Ardith interjected. Ardith glanced over to a shocked Jonathan challengingly, and Evelyn immediately understood. Oh, Evelyn said with sudden understanding. That's why Ardith didn't like Jonathan. However, Hermione was completely oblivious. I'm going to put the dessert in the kitchen. Hermione walked quickly into the kitchen where no one could see her and leaned against the counter to calm her pounding heart. Oh, what? O'Connell whispered into Evie's ear. Evelyn tried to point to 3 of the other occupants discreetly to convey the clear jealousy struggle going on, but only confused O'Connell even further. What? Oh, never mind, you'll see. As soon as Hermione had collected herself, she walked back into an immediate inquisition from Jonathan. Why does this fellow think we are engaged, Hermione? Jonathan said hysterically. Hermione tilted her head in confusion. Truth be told, she had completely forgotten about it. Hermione had thought one of the men in black would have made a comment long ago, and she eventually just figured they had forgotten about it, and proceeded to forget about it herself. But then, Hermione remembered her conversation with Ardith that day he delivered the blanket. And what started as a suppressed giggle immediately turned into full-blown hysterical laughter. Then she caught sight of Jonathan's face and began laughing even harder. Wait, O'Connell interrupted. Are you two not engaged? Hermione struggled to breathe as her laughing only increased. Ardith looked to O'Connell and then to a Jonathan downing another glass of scotch and finally went over what had happened that day. Hermione had laughed then too. I'm as engaged as I've ever been. Ardith rubbed his face in his hands. They were never engaged. Hermione finally stopped laughing long enough to take the bottle of scotch away from Jonathan and lock it into the cabinet. Jonathan tried to snatch the key from her until Hermione tossed it at Ardith, who instinctively caught it. Jonathan looked at Ardith calculatingly, but finally sagged in defeat. Hermione was incredibly grateful for the incident. She no longer felt like a tongue-tied schoolgirl. Ardith was shaking his head in disbelief as he tucked the key into a pocket in his robes, and finally everyone was settling down. You are a cruel woman, Hermione Evans, Jonathan said darkly as he took the tea offered to him by Evelyn. I suppose no chocolate croissants for you then, Hermione said with a mischievous grin. Now, Jonathan backtracked. Let's not be hasty. That's what I thought. Now that Ardith observed them, he felt absolutely stupid. The two of them never touched, and certainly didn't act the way that O'Connell and Evelyn were. Ardith had simply thought it was cultural. In case you were wondering, Ardith. Hermione felt a swoop in her stomach as Ardith turned to stare at her intently. Jonathan is more of a brother, and what your window seal soldier heard was merely a long-standing joke between me and Jonathan. Hermione isn't lucky enough to snare a catch like me, Jonathan said cockily. Yes, Hermione said sarcastically. I definitely envy the woman who has to pick you up drunk at the local Casper, manage your gambling, and compete with every not-so-reputable prostitute that catches your eye. Oh, Jonathan grabbed his heart. You wound me. And I thought our romance could withstand any trial. Ardith smiled with relief. Now that it had been pointed out to him, he couldn't believe he hadn't understood. Ardith would blame it on the cultural differences. Now he could see the sarcasm and overall silliness of their grandiose conversations. Ardith had honestly thought that they were hopelessly lost on each other and could not contain his overwhelming jealousy. He looked at Hermione laughing and joking with him. What would being loved by her be like if it wasn't what she had with Jonathan? Thankfully, the rest of the night went swimmingly. With the tension between Jonathan and Ardith pushed out of the way, they all had a good time eating and retelling the comical situations the lot of them had gotten into. You should really come over again sometime, Ardith. Ardith was munching on the croissants Hermione had made blissfully and looked to Evelyn regretfully. I don't come into Cairo often, I'm afraid, but I will visit you next time I do. Oh, Evelyn was disappointed. More so because of how she saw the aloof Ardith glancing at Hermione when he thought she wasn't looking. My tribe needs me to fulfill my duties with them. I really only come when I have business with my uncle. Ardith looked at Miss Evans regretfully. He almost wished she was marrying Jonathan if he didn't possess so many vices. Now, Miss Evans was a possibility he wasn't free to explore. Ardith had to go back, and he knew there was very little chance he would want to marry someone else when she was shining in the back of his mind. I promise to keep your uncle company within your absence, Hermione grinned mischievously. I look forward to hearing about it. Ardith finally stood to prepare to leave, and Hermione walked into the kitchen and came back with the rest of the croissants and handed them to Ardith. For your parents, Hermione's heart spluttered at his warming grin. My thanks. May Allah smile down on you. Hermione let out a huge breath as soon as the door closed behind him and immediately startled as Evelyn launched herself onto her. He likes you, Evelyn said excitedly, and Hermione looked at her in disbelief. What? That man is smitten with you, Jonathan reaffirmed. Ardith definitely looked like he wanted to castrate Jonathan at any given moment when he thought the two of you were engaged, Rick agreed. And you don't think that has anything to do with the fact that Jonathan was running around with a bunch of women and thought we were engaged and might not have thought well of Jonathan because of it? How would he have known? Rick reasoned. They've been following me for 5 years, Rick, Hermione said with her best no-shit expression. Forgot about that, Rick conceded. Hermione nodded firmly. There you go. Hermione collected her leather coat. Oh, come now, Evelyn followed Hermione. He is 23 years old. I am 29. It's a ridiculous thought. It's not that significant a difference, Jonathan said. Us young men find the maturing woman very alluring. Hermione flicked Jonathan in the back of the head. Ow, and he lives somewhere off in the desert. This is the 6th time I have seen him in 5 years. You will drop it, Evelyn. Hermione pulled on her coat. Dinner was lovely. It was nice getting to know you, Rick. Likewise. And Hermione left. Why is she so stubborn? Evelyn sighed. Just because you had your very own love story doesn't mean everyone else can, Jonathan said cynically. He looked longingly at the liquor cabinet and then shrieked with horror. Rick pulled his gun and Evelyn startled terribly. What is it? Evelyn said frantically. That cad took the liquor key. Ow. Keep your hands to yourself, O'Connell. Then don't give other people a heart attack over a glass of whiskey. Hermione was just about to apparate when Ardith literally popped up out of nowhere, and she nearly fell on her ass to stop herself. Ardith grabbed hold of her arm to keep her from toppling over. Maybe I should go easy on Mr. Bay if that's how it feels to have me popping up on him all the time. Hermione held her startled heart. My apologies. Ardith's smile was beautiful, and Hermione gulped. Evelyn just had to open her big mouth and make Hermione completely self-conscious again. Why are you back? Did you forget something? Hermione sounded cagey. She really wished she could kick her own butt to get herself to be normal again. Ardith nodded and held up a small key. Hermione snorted before taking it. I'll give it to them later. A little abstinence will do Jonathan good, and if he really can't handle it, he'll just go out. Ardith just stood there as Hermione placed the key in her purse. Miss Evans really was beautiful. He breathed in her delicious smell. Hermione didn't know what to do. Should she turn around? Or more likely go to the ladies' room in the lobby of Evie's expensive accommodations and apparate out of there? So, how did you escape out of here without me or my men being able to catch you? Ardith smiled teasingly. It wouldn't be a trade secret if I told you, Hermione laughed. Ardith reached forward and took her hand the way that he had seen British gentlemen occasionally do. He turned her hand over and kissed her wrist savoringly. Hermione stopped breathing. Ardith enjoyed the feeling of her skin, but when he opened his eyes, he noticed crude writing on her exposed arm. Ardith frowned and reached to touch the word carved into her arm. Mudblood. Ardith was frowning and confused, and Hermione immediately came back to herself. She tried to tug her arm out of his hold, but was unfortunately met with a gentle and strong hold. Ardith continued to touch it, but Hermione started to have trouble breathing for completely different reasons. A title I wear proudly. Please let go, Hermione said, while trying to swallow down the panic. Ardith glanced at her face sharply. Fear. It was the first time since what happened with Lackner that he had seen that emotion on her face, and he had caused it. I'm sorry. Ardith let go of her arm, and Hermione clenched and unclenched her hands in an attempt to release some of the tension. Ardith watched as she smoothed down the front of her dress with an incredible amount of agitation, and he swallowed. He had just wanted to touch her, and he had made her this upset. Ardith turned around and fled. Hermione felt horrible. Ardith really hadn't done anything wrong. She wasn't ready to be touched or to answer questions about her scars. The awful thing about being under the constant eye of the wizarding public was the incessant questions, the requests for battle stories, the complete lack of understanding that Hermione was completely destroyed from what had happened. The paparazzi continued to hound and harass her until Hermione didn't want to leave her house anymore despite her stubbornness, and continuing to move forward despite the effect it had on her in the long run. Hermione had embraced the aura fashion because it covered everything. No scar was on display. Hermione could pull up her hood and be invisible for a short time, and Hermione could see what Evelyn had been talking about. Ardith seemed to savor touching her, but he was young, had the world open to him. Would Ardith really want her once her Pandora's box of issues burst open? Hermione walked a bit back up the hall, made sure no one was looking, and apparated back to her home. The minute that Hermione got home, Harry was immediately snuggling and rubbing against her legs. She picked him up, and he immediately started purring up a storm. Hermione walked up the stairs and collapsed onto her bed, and Harry settled into a ball on her chest. She smiled. Harry always knew when something was wrong, and was her bowl of warmth when Hermione couldn't get through on her own. Alumu, Basma looked up as Ardith offered her a bag of heavenly-smelling bread. What is this? I thought you would be in Cairo for several days to arrange everything for your uncle's funeral. Uncle is alive, Ardith smiled widely. Basma's mouth dropped and she hugged Ardith with exuberance. I knew that old bat of a man wouldn't go down so easily, and the bread. Miss Evans, Ardith's smile dimmed a little. Miss Evans sent them. Basma looked at her son carefully. Did she barter them for your first-born son? Why do you look so sad, Ardith? I did something stupid. Ardith looked incredibly downcast, Basma sat him down and made him some coffee. "Tell me about it," Basma ordered. Adam walked in on them an hour later. "I thought you were in Cairo," Adam questioned sadly. "Oh, Terence is alive," Basma said distractedly. Adam smiled big and hugged his son happily. "That's wonderful. Why does our son look like someone died?" Adam asked Basma. "Because he found out Miss Evans is not engaged to Mr. Carnahan and managed to upset her." Ardith immediately sighed, as his father immediately took a seat next to Alumu and looked at Ardith expectantly. This was going to be a long night.